Good afternoon, folks. It's 4 o'clock, and let us convene for the session on a culinary arts panel. I'm Jack Rayner. I'm your stage captain here for the day here at First Baptist. Let me give you a few brief announcements and then introduce our moderator. Our authors are going to be signing books after the presentation. If you are interested in meeting them and having your book signed, go out the door that you came in and go to the left. There will be a couple of folks who will direct traffic and help you to get around to the book signing tent, which is right to the left of the entrance here. There will be no questions and answer period. We'll give our authors and our speakers plenty of time to talk to us, and so that's how we will proceed. The books are available for purchase at the Caris bookstore, which is to our right outside here. And if you will remember, please, that the Decatur Book Festival, presented by Emory University, is a nonprofit organization, and so the festival is dependent on sponsors and volunteers to bring donations and great authors to Decatur, such as we hear today. And so please, as you are considering your donation period, the Decatur Book Festival would love to be included in your thoughts and at the bottom line of your check. So, if you will, do the honors now, please. Make sure that all of your phones are turned off and things are silenced so that we can listen without interruption. And let me introduce, if I can, our moderator for the session. Matwan Howard is the Associate Vice President for Development at Yale University, and he has come back from New Haven to be with us today. He is a major foodie, and so he grew up in the home as a chef and is comfortable in the kitchen and discussing fine cuisine. He has a passion for the art and literary communities. He is on the AJC Decatur Book Festival board, and he is the Professor Emeritus of the board. So, Matwan, do the honors. Thank you for being here. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Jack. Well, you know, while you're clapping, I was just thinking about that. This is the last session of the day, and I think we should give a round of applause for the fact that we're doing this. We're back. We're in person. We had a full slate of program all day, so I'm just excited to be here. I hope you are. As Jack mentioned, you're in for a treat. I do love talking about food, and I know there are a few of you out there that were probably excited about Belinda, who was not able to be here. So I'm pinch hitting, and I get that, but we're gonna have fun. And so first of all, I want to introduce our speakers. And so first, I want to introduce Jessica Formicola, who's the creator. Oh, sure, you can clap. Go ahead. All right. She's the creator of Savory Experiments, a trusted food and lifestyle blog. She appears regularly on national networks providing cooking demonstrations and entertaining ideas. She has contributed to Parade, The Daily Meal, MASHED, and Better Homes and Gardens, and has partnered with over 100 national food brands on product releases and cooking tutorials. Formicola lives near Baltimore, Maryland, with her husband and children. Her new book is for sale in the bookshop. It's called Beef It Up, 50 mouth-watering recipes for ground beef, steaks, stews, roasts, ribs, and more. I don't know about you, but I am now hungry. All right, our next panelist is Julia Skinner, a food writer, fermentation and foraging educator, visual artist, and nature lover. She is the founder of Root, Atlanta's fermentation and food history company, which offers classes, consulting, and a newsletter of essays and recipes. She has a PhD in library and information science and degrees in book art, book history, and in psychology. She was named in the 2020 class of 40 under 40 for both Georgia Trend and the Atlanta Business Chronicle for her work with Root and her community engagement. She also serves as the chair of this year's Cookbook Awards for the International Association of Culinary Professionals. Her new book is Our Fermented Lives, a history of how fermented foods have shaped and cultures and communities. It's right here. So, and then next, we have Judith Mclaughlin, who was, all right. Judith was raised in County Armagh in the heart of rural Ireland. She settled in Atlanta, Georgia, and started her own gourmet business called the Shamrock and Peach. Specializing in Irish cuisine, Judith has created her own unique food fusion by blending the techniques of her homeland with the newfound flavors of the South to great acclaim. Judith has developed her brand into an emerging business encompassing her cooking shows, cookbooks, blogs, and tours. I'm really excited about this tour. Her newest book is A Return to Ireland, a culinary journey from America to Ireland. So real excited for all three of them. Please give them a round of applause. So I'd like to just start out with a question to all of you. I would love it if you each could give a brief synopsis of your book. Perhaps you can mention a few favorite recipes, but I was thinking about this last night, I would love to understand, for this particular book, what was the inspiration? What was that hook that really made you write this particular one? So want to start with you, Jessica?
Sure. So I have been working with cattle ranchers in the United States for probably about the last 6 or 7 years. And I've come to have such a respect for their art. It's a little bit misunderstood. I'm sure we've all seen some of the sordid news articles that have come out regarding cows and other things, but the pride and the respect that goes into ranchers and farmers in the United States is so often overlooked, because we just go to the grocery store and we see stuff and we buy it, and it's that easy. When you start getting back to farmers markets and actually visiting the ranches and meeting the families and understanding all that goes into it and the generational qualities, it really hit home with me. And the cattle ranchers were just so inspirational. So I started working a lot with Certified Angus Beef brand, and when the opportunity came up to do a beef cookbook, I was really into it for several reasons. A, I'm a female, and most beef authors are male, and I'm one of the very few that deals with beef. The other was that most of them were smoking and grilling, and so many beef recipes aren't smoking and grilling. They're made in the kitchen. So we created this book that anybody can use. I used to live in the city, so I didn't have access to that kind of stuff, and I still wanted amazing food. So this book is no special equipment. Anything can be made in the kitchen, but it's really bringing back comfort food, but elevated and with a lot more veggies and a little bit healthier of a take. So, for instance, we do a Salisbury steak, but we teach you how to caramelize onions to make this amazing gravy, and how to get a great brown in cast iron on those patties, so that you have this elevated dish with added vegetables, spinach, peas, mushrooms, things along those lines. But I also like to give everybody confidence to create their own recipes, not just look at mine and follow it exactly. I want you to understand the ingredients that you're working with, so the next time you go to create something, whether it's your own or somebody else's recipe, you're comfortable enough to play around with it a little bit. And I feel like that's what gets people back into the kitchen and excited about cooking again. So we're using beef, and we're using it in more unexpected ways. A lot of salads, a lot of soups, appetizers, not just the celebratory meals, some fun stuff like a deconstructed cheeseburger soup, which is just like pure comfort food, but great for everybody, and salads, because beef belongs with veggies. It's a wonderful accompaniment. So it's a fun book, and it's a different take on beef.
Awesome, thank you. Julia?
Yeah, so Our Fermented Lives is all about the history of fermentation. Fermentation exists in every single culture around the world, and we've been doing it for at least 10,000 years, so very, very long history, very broad history. And I came to this, I've been fermenting food for 15 or 20 years, and I came to the subject of this book as I started to, do my own research and really deep dive into this, and discovered that there wasn't really a comprehensive history. And of course, it's such a big topic that no history could be fully comprehensive. It's not like this lists every single fermented food that has ever existed in the world, but it does, I think, as close as one can get. And so it explores this process through all of these different themes, all these different ways that we connect with fermentation. So, for example, using it to preserve food, using it as a part of our community building activities, the ways that fermentation has connected with our health over the years, all of these different things. And so I hope that it's accessible for people. I also tried to not use special equipment or anything like that. Just have it be very accessible and fun. And the recipes that I have in there really run the gamut of different recipes around the world. One of my favorites is this Scottish oat porridge called Sowens. I also really enjoy tapache, which is like a fermented pineapple beverage that's really, really good. Ton of different stuff in there, and so I hope that everybody will find something that they want to eat.
Yeah, my first book, The Shamrock and Peach, was really inspired by my own immigrant journey of leaving Ireland and coming to Atlanta and develop my own Southern fusion. My next book that is going to be available next week, so we're don't have it available today, but it's going to be available next week for pre-order. It's really taking the larger immigrant story, and I was inspired to write Return to Ireland with my tour business, and I was really taken by, in the past, Americans, the Irish-shaped America coming over with immigration. As you know, millions of Irish people emigrated to the United States. And today, Americans are coming over to Ireland to enjoy the wonderful food and to experience the culture. And America is now shaping Ireland through tourism and also through the investment. And the book is really a celebration of the immigrant recipes that Irish brought over to America, but it's also the recipes which are the delicious Irish food that many Americans travel over to Ireland and they say, well, that was delicious, I want that recipe. How do I get that recipe? So the recipes are from traveling to Ireland, and they are the recipes that people want to make. So they're the modern recipes as well as some of those traditional recipes that are Irish American recipes, and some of them are my own fusion, and I love to create, to blend those together. So some of my favorite recipes are going to be the likes of lamb shanks that are cooked really slow in the oven, and I love to have those with carrots and some Irish champ, nice comfort food. I also love soups as well, so we're using lots of really great fresh produce, and many Americans think that Irish food is this bland, overcooked, boring food, but if you travel to Ireland, you will see that the food is just delicious flavors and the freshest of ingredients. So that's really is the essence of the food. It's very fresh, it's farm to table, and they are Irish-based ingredients, but they're food that in the south that we can also love to have those wonderful fresh produce and prepared and simply but delicious. So that's the inspiration of the book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. I really appreciate you all sharing that. So Jessica, let's start with you. Let's dig into beef it up. I want to start with the hard one right off the back. All right. During a time when most people are limiting the amount of beef in their diet, not me, by the way, why this book now?
It's a very popular question at this moment. I think that there are many ways to lead healthy lifestyles, and I am not a dietitian and I'm not a doctor, but I personally like to focus more on whole foods instead of processed foods. And beef is still one single ingredient, and it's also a perfect protein. So while I see folks kind of putting together things like protein shakes and stuff like that, like what you could actually have, 4 ounces of a good organic piece of beef that tastes a lot better than a powder in milk, and
Really?
get way more out of it, and your body's going to respond better to that. I just feel like it's a lot healthier than that. So that it's. I don't want to take beef off the table, and I also don't want to get into too much controversy and just like humane rights of animals and things like that. But when we're looking at things of if you do eat protein still of cattle versus chicken versus pork, cattle are actually the most humanely raised. And for me, that's really important. Our family eats actually mostly beef and seafood. And I know that's not a popular answer, but when you get into these things and you start visiting some of these farms, you start to see things and experience things that I'm just not comfortable with. But beef I still was, so.
That's great.
I
Wow.
still eat beef, and I think it's possible to do it on a healthy diet. Moderation, portion control, and knowing how to prepare it is paramount, but isn't that with everything, right?
No, that's great. I appreciate your answer. So your salad chapter captured my attention, all right, especially the spinach, apple, and fennel salad. What was your inspiration for salads and your unique salad dressings? By the way, I'm one that I love salads just as much as I love beef, so.
Good, you're a friend in my book then. Beef and salads are so funny. People either have like a taco salad or they go to a steakhouse and they have like a bachelor salad, they usually call it. And it's just so narrow-minded. Beef pairs so wonderfully with so many flavors. And like you said, the one with fennel. Fennel is one of those amazingly underused vegetables. I use a lot of fennel. I also love parsnips. I think parsnips are underused too. But you can create these wonderful meals, and they don't have to be an appetizer, and they don't have to be a side dish. They can be the main entree. And again, going back to being healthy, pairing beef with different types of vegetables actually increases the amount of nutrients that your body absorbs when you eat them together. And spinach is one of those with beef. So the amount of iron that your body can intake when it's paired with spinach and beef together is actually exponentially larger. So there was like a lot of thought other than just flavor components that went into building these. One of my other favorites is the Lemony Brussels sprout salad, because I want people to get away from the fact that salads have to be a base of traditional leafy greens. So instead it's a warm salad, and we roast Brussels sprouts, potatoes, and onions, and use the browning qualities from those, and then a really bright lemon vinaigrette along with some sliced beef.
Wow, like I said, I'm getting hungry. That sounds really good. So when you talk about kitchen tools, cast iron skillets top the list, and I'm completely in agreement with you. I'd love for you to just, we might geek out for a few minutes on cast iron, sorry. But, tell us why you use and recommend cast iron.
Oh, they're just a workhorse in the kitchen. How many other people love cast iron?
Yeah. Look at that. Okay. We got the right crowd.
So we're among friends. That's awesome. So I probably was in my 20s when I first discovered cast iron, and I was like, where has this been all my life? My mother just never used it. She was always kind of a non-stick person because it was easy instead of, but cast iron can be easy. So now I collect a lot of cast iron. It probably is my #1 used pan in the kitchen for nearly everything, but it just adds so much more flavor to any dish. I like when they get nice and slick, and they are almost non-stick. So I go to like antique stores and stuff like that and find something that's been used for 40, 50, 60 years, and that's where I start my own seasoning on it. But for beef in particular, it's an excellent way to develop so much flavor, even if you are going to go on to braise or if you're just going to slice. And the fond on the pan is going to help develop that browning. You need something that can get super, super hot. You need something that's going to have an even cooking temperature, and cast iron would do that regardless if you're using electric, propane, or gas to heat it. But it also doesn't break, and the the seasoning on it, I keep going back to that because that's in my head. Like, if I use that to make beef and then I go and I saute my vegetables in that too, it just keeps adding, it just keeps building, and you can have so much more sophistication in the flavor. We talk a lot about cast iron in the book. My entire first chapter is all about beef, about the beef cuts, demystifying beef cuts, but also the best ways to cook them, because unlike chicken and pork, each cut has a very unique TLC that it needs to bring out the best flavors in it, but nearly all of them can be cooked in cast iron in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. Well, just a quick follow-up on that. For those in the audience who've steered clear of cast iron because it's, seen as difficult or hard to take care of, what would your response be to that?
People are so worried about losing the seasoning. You can always re-season a cast iron pan. All it takes is some oil and a little baking in the oven. But I clean mine with coarse kosher salt. Say that 5 times fast. And a potato, actually. The starch in the potato and the salt can get off any muck that's stuck on there. But I feel like the muck is also kind of like a badge of honor. Obviously you don't want to leave a ton of stuff on there, but that's what helps develop the flavor. So I just use water, salt, and a potato and scrub it and then re-oil it and throw it back in the cupboard. They really don't have, I find that stainless steel actually has more upkeep in trying to clean it and keep up with it than cast iron. They're actually better when they're a little bit dirty. And like I said, you can always scrub it and re-season it. It's not that big of a deal.
That's great. For those who didn't raise their hand, I highly recommend you, next estate sale you pass, pop in, grab one of those cast iron. You won't regret it.
They're also cheap if you buy them new.
Very true.
You go
very
online
true.
and get a lodge, it's $12.
That's true. That's
best
true.
deal you can get.
So, actually, they're more expensive than some of the estate sales, it's true. You are an ambassador for the Certified Angus Beef brand. What has that alliance been like?
Oh, it's been excellent. I've learned so much. I've worked with them for 6 or 7 years now. I've visited their culinary institutes and worked with all of their chefs. I've been able to visit cattle ranches and feed ranches, and just that's where my respect for beef has really come from. I always enjoyed a steak or a burger before that, but my respect for the industry has really come from working with Certified Angus Beef brand. And for those of you who don't know, it's actually a brand like Kleenex is a brand of tissue, and they only work with U.S. owned and run family farms. So it's all small business. And I think that to me, when I can't buy local, they use all local families. So the beef that I buy in Maryland is coming from a local family in Pennsylvania, even though it has a brand name on it. But in order to be affiliated with them, you also have to pass the cattle herd. As a herd, not an individual cow, has to pass 10 different markings, and all of those are standards of care, which again, to me, the humane raising of animals, the humane treatment of animals is a big deal, but also the quality of the beef, so you're not getting something that wasn't fed right, no antibiotics, all the buzzwords that come along with proteins these days are automatically affiliated with that brand, so you know that you're getting a good quality meat that was also raised locally.
That's great, and thank you. There's a lot to think about when it comes to beef. I think I definitely learned a few things that certainly I didn't know before. So, I want to shift over to you, Julia, and let's talk a little bit about our fermented lives. And so the subtitle of your book is How Fermented Foods Have Shaped Cultures and Community. I'd love if you could, give us a deeper dive into fermentation history and the overview of the process.
Yeah, so fermentation, I really like the definition that Sandra Katz uses, which is just the transformative action of microbes. Again, we're talking about all of these different types of foods and different processes. I mean, a lot of us might think of yogurt or sauerkraut, but bread, any alcohol, beer or wine, distilled spirits, all of that is fermented. Chocolate, vanilla, coffee, black tea, all of these things are fermented. And so I find that focusing on the transformative process rather than trying to focus on the specific types of fermentation is a better way to think about it, because it allows you to think about all of these different foods. And when I'm thinking about the, culture and community and all of this, one thing that really stands out to me is that we're engaged in a collaboration when we're fermenting. We are working with other living creatures to produce this food. And we're kind of on their timeline, and we're trying to make an environment they feel comfortable in so they can transform our food for us. And so even when you're fermenting alone, you're already in community. And then we have all of these examples of different histories of taking fermented foods and either using them to feed our communities or making them in community. So for example, the kimchi making gathering, kimjang, that happens every harvest autumn season in Korea is done with community members coming together and preparing all of this kimchi together for the winter. And it's great because you have a couple different ways this is feeding your community. The first being everybody, of course, coming together in the first place, interacting, talking, preparing food together, all of this. And then you also have, in the future, you're caring for the community by increasing your food security, making sure that you have food to share throughout the winter. So there's a lot of different ways that it influences culture, but those are a couple that come immediately to mind.
That's great. Thank you. So you are a foraging educator, right? You have that title. So for those who don't know, could you please explain foraging?
Yeah, so foraging, and I think it goes really well with fermentation too, which I think is why I got into both of them in tandem. Foraging is just looking for wild plants, wild growing plants. So instead of, say, having my little garden bed with my peppers and my tomatoes in it, you're looking for plants that maybe we don't always think to eat but are edible. And there's obvious safety concerns and sustainability concerns and things that one needs to take into account. But there are there's a huge abundance of food around us that maybe we don't think to eat. Some of my favorites this time of year are violet leaves and goldenrod. And I don't think that, those are things many of us probably grew up eating, but I love them. And yeah, it's a very fun way to see the world and to help you appreciate all of the abundance in nature when you're going out and around.
I'm curious, as you referenced the world, and I'm thinking from a regional standpoint, is there anything you can kind of point us to? Obviously, we're in the southern region. I actually live in northeastern Connecticut. Could you point us to kind of some examples or focus?
Yeah, so the nice thing about this region is obviously we have warmer winters than you do, sorry. So
yes, you do.
So we have a greater ability to find wild foods throughout the year than up north. When I lived in Iowa, for example, in the winter, you could definitely find things. For example, you would get, barks and things like that, maybe like maple syrup and things, but you wouldn't have, much in the way of leafy greens or anything. And so here, throughout the winter, we can find all sorts of things. Again, of course, bark is one thing, but rose hips are another, and chickweed, which grows all over the place, and I'm sure grows by you as well, is very delicious. I think it tastes kind of like green apples. And it tends to grow both in the spring and the fall here. And so those are just a couple of the things you might see around that you might enjoy.
That's great. I'm definitely going to have to maybe try to look for some of that, later on the year. Your chapters are titled Ferments for Life, Preservation, Flavor, and Health. Tell us how they're interconnected.
Well, they're interconnected just in the sense that we are using this food that we are working with microbes to transform our ingredients is then transforming us in all of these different ways. So for preservation, for example, we have to remember that for most of human history, people couldn't just pop down to Kroger and, buy strawberries in the middle of winter. They had the food that was available to them that they had bothered to preserve. And so using fermentation was a very real form of food security for people. And so preservation allowed us to transform how we live in our communities. We could be in one place, we could put up a lot of food, we could have more food security, we were able to eat better. So that's one example. And then Health-wise, of course, our microbiome is a big, big part of our health, and ferments have the probiotics that make that possible, but also have many traditional ferments also have prebiotics, which is the fiber that helps keep our microbiome nourished. So there's all of these different ways that this food has influenced, our physical health, our bodies, our communities, and what and how we eat.
That's great. Tell us about your company, Root.
Yeah, so Root, I founded in 2018, and much like my desire in the book to really deep dive and do this examination of history, I founded this company because I wanted to talk about the history of food and talk about what we eat in ways that made it feel personally relevant to people. And so fermentation has become a big focus of it, but I also do food history consulting, which is really interesting. Like I've had a couple times where I've helped novelists figure out which cookbooks they should reference in their novels. I helped out in a post-apocalyptic science fiction film once. I've done all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's been very fun, but a lot of what I do is I just teach people these very simple methods to prepare food. So a lot of food waste reduction, for example. So how can we repurpose our scraps? How can we turn those into food? And how can we ferment food without all these special pieces of equipment and without a bunch of money? How can we make this very easy and use the tools and traditions that we've had around for thousands and thousands of years to feed ourselves today?
That's great. Thank you. All right, why don't we shift over to you, Judith, if that's all right. And so I've been able to look at two books of yours. As you mentioned that the book that you have coming out is a return to Ireland, a culinary journey from America to Ireland. I focus more, obviously, on the shamrock and the peach. Yeah. You mentioned that most Irish communities in the U.S. are concentrated in larger northern cities. We were talking earlier. Yes. So what was it like food-wise moving to the American South?
Yes, well, moving over from Ireland to Boston, it was obviously hog heaven, as they say, for the Irish to move to Boston, just like it would be in Chicago or any of those great cities that have a great St. Patrick's Day parade and of course, I loved that about living there. When I moved to the American South, I didn't really have quite the same appeal being Irish. People didn't really identify with Irish as much as a culture as they did in the North. But ironically, I felt really at home in the South. And the reason is because of the amazing Southern hospitality. And in Ireland, we always have a saying that there's always room for one more. Going back to the Brehon laws with our food history, we always believed in Ireland that there was a welcome for a stranger. So that's why hospitality is such a great thing in Ireland. People always say about the Irish people are so welcoming. And when I moved to the South, I felt really at home and I felt so welcomed, and I loved the food here. I loved the emphasis on the delicious fried food, even from the fried chicken to all the yummy pimento cheese and things I'd never tasted before. And when I actually dug a little bit deeper, I realized that the Scots-Irish were really fundamental in settling the South as immigrants, going back over 200 years, probably close to 300 years, whenever the first Irish first arrived in the Boston area. And that was very Anglified, and the Scots-Irish really weren't as welcome in New England at that time, and they forged south. And they went through the Appalachians, and that's why we have the wonderful influence with Irish music that became bluegrass, that became country music. And then I could also see that in food, how the Irish influenced things like scones became biscuits, And the skillet, you talked about the skillet. I love my cast iron skillet, and I love the hearth breads, like the soda bread. And again, it was very like the cornbread. And I started to see how these traditions of cooking in the griddle, in the open fire, how the Irish would have influenced that. And you get all these wonderful breads like the sweet potato biscuits and these things that tasted like home, and the food tasted familiar to me. And even though that may not be recognized or celebrated, that to me was a no-brainer that the Irish had settled and brought that influence, and I did feel that sense of belonging, strangely even more so in the South. Even though Boston is meant to be hug heaven for the Irish, I felt more at home, well, just as home here in the South. I have to say I did love my time in New England as well, but in a different way.
That's great. I'm curious, initially, was it difficult for you to kind of fuse your traditional cooking styles with the available ingredients in the South, or?
Yes, I think one of the biggest differences I found was the flour. In Ireland, we have really quite soft wheat, so we find that the breads and the cakes would be a lot more softer. And when you go to Ireland, you'll taste a difference in the flour. And I had to adjust it because the wheat is definitely harder in America, and so I had to adjust a lot of my recipes. For example, the brown bread, which is our most famous brown soda bread, it is very, the grains would be more kind of whole grain and more hearty, and have more of the actual whole grain intact. So I had to tamper with that a little bit and add some wheat germ and other ingredients that are available, unless you freshly mill your flour, and a lot of people have their own mills and do that, and you can get it more that freshness in America as well. But I've tried to adapt my recipes for the grocery store so that you can get those whole grains in there. And obviously things like the butter and the dairy is a little bit different, but you can buy Irish butter here in America, which is wonderful. So that certainly helps with adapting a lot of my recipes.
That's awesome. I have definitely purchased that. That's interesting about the flour. I didn't realize that. So give us a mental picture of your home region, in the heart of rural Ireland and its culinary flavors and traditional dishes. I'd love to just kind of get a picture.
Yes, well, when people come over to Ireland, you'll find they're just blown away by the food, the Michelin star restaurants, and obviously the chefs are just cooking these just amazing cuisine, and the way they're preparing. We're talking about fermentation, yet they're using things like seaweed and things that would have been maybe in the past thrown away or not really appreciated. Really this past, in particular, generation of Ireland are getting back to what is there in Ireland, what they can use. They obviously are an island surrounded by wonderful clean waters and rivers. And they can, the farms, the smaller farms make a big difference as well. The average cow herd is between 40 and 80 cows, so it's really small compared to the average herd in America. And I think that having the smaller farms does lead to that quality. And also we always say in Ireland we have happy cows because the grass is very green, and that does make a difference with the carotene in the grass, the diet of the cows, and therefore you can see and you can taste the difference. And right from the pub, the Irish pub, to the basic coffee shop, you're going to have great food, and people just love to go to Ireland, and maybe even the traditional fish and chips. It's still good. It may not be the most healthy in the world, but it's certainly a favourite. And I have to say our drink is fantastic. I have to talk about our whiskey and our gin and our Guinness. So that's something that you don't want to miss out when you go to Ireland.
Definitely. We'll make that part of the tour for sure. The photography in, the Shamrock and Peach is breathtaking, and it really enhances the enjoyment of the book. Are these photos from your region, or is that all over Ireland?
Yes, thank you for asking about the photography. I have to credit my husband. He is the photographer in the cookbook, and so he got into photography probably by accident. He is a professional artist, and I started my food blog, and I needed help with that, so he started to get into food styling and photography, and he did all the photographs for both the Shamrock and Peach and Return to Ireland, and obviously my food blog. But he really started to find a passion for photographing the landscape as well as the food. And we do encompass the entire island of Ireland, both with travel in my business and also for photography. And Ireland is a photographer's dream. Especially, he talks about magic hour, about photographing either sunrise or sunset. And some of the images, the rainbows that you get are just beautiful because it does rain a lot in Ireland. But the wonderful side is that we do have wonderful green grass and we do get beautiful rainbows. And sometimes I know one of his favourite shots is of a castle, the most photographed castle in Ireland. And he was over there doing photography, and it was such a bad day, rained all day. And he said, "This weather's just terrible. I'm so disappointed." But he did plan to photograph this castle. Just as he was coming up to the castle, the rain stopped and this gorgeous rainbow just came out of the castle. And he said, "This is amazing. This is like the best shot that I've ever taken." And he framed it, and I brought it to events, and everybody said, "How did your husband Photoshop that onto the castle?" We said, "I promise you, it's not photoshopped. It is real." And like nobody wanted to buy it because they thought this isn't real. But you just have those magic moments in Ireland where you feel as if there could be a fairy or a leprechaun could just jump out, and the light is really stunning for photography.
That's awesome. And Gary, there's Gary right there who took all those wonderful pictures. We mentioned your new book. Can you just tell us a little bit about A Return to Ireland?
Yes. Yeah, I'm really excited about this book. I've been working on it for about 10 years now. That's how long from the first book came out. But the pandemic, like many of us, gave us that extra time that we never had before. So I had the chance to complete that book. And our distributor is Penguin Random House, and they're been a wonderful support. And we're really, really excited about the book and about the recipes as well. I have had a chance to work with the likes of the Piedmont Cancer Centre and this past few years, and I love to be able to have healthy recipes as well. And obviously getting older as that happens, and realising that I also need to eat nutritious food that helps my mind, that helps my body. And looking at nutritious recipes that are also with my Irish heritage, and that's what I really have been doing, because I like food to taste good, and I also love it to be healthy as well. So these recipes, I think, that reflect how my diet has changed, during this past 10 years as well, from I wrote my first book. So I do have a lot of salads there in the book, and a lot of great vegetables. Vegetarian recipes, for example, the vegetarian shepherd's pie, which is wonderful with lentils, and I don't have any white potatoes in it. I've substituted that for celeriac and parsnip. So I've adapted a lot of the recipes, and really it's not just my passion, it's how Ireland is going. It is much more healthy with nutrition, much more aware of the way that we're eating and how food is going to affect our body and makes us feel. But I still like to be true to the stories of my heritage, because I think when you read a recipe, I love that sense of history, and it means something to have those traditional recipes, and I feel they need to be passed down generation to generation. I have 2 sons, I don't have a daughter, but for me it's important because that I'm passed on from several women, from my great-grandmother who ran, she actually worked in Boston. I talk a lot about her in the book. She was a cook in Boston. She emigrated to Boston, and she unusually had a chance to return to Ireland. And I grew up with her stories from my grandparents. And when my husband had an opportunity to move to Boston, I said, we are going, because I knew there was something in my DNA that wanted to fulfill the chance that my great-grandmother did not have to remain in Boston. And we actually first moved to Boston. And I talk a lot about that. And then from my grandmother, who ran a bed and breakfast, my sisters and I, the 3 of us, we also had a restaurant in Ireland. And even though I did not go to culinary school, I did business, and I studied business. But when I moved to America, I really wanted to cook because I wanted to have that connection. I felt culture shock, I felt homesick. And I wanted food to be a way of connecting me to my grandmother and my heritage, and I also want to be able to share that, because many others also have ancestors that are Irish or have stories and recipes or even memories that will bring them to a place and a time. And I want food to be able to create those moments for other families to enjoy around the table.
That's great. I really appreciate you sharing that. Might want to come back around to that later. I love talking about the stories of food. It was funny. I was sitting here as I listened to each of you share today. I couldn't help but hearken back to pre-pandemic and thinking about the culinary stage that we normally would have, and with a full kitchen and cooking demonstrations. And so I was sitting here thinking about a tenderloin with some violet leaves and with an little Irish flair to it. And I could imagine the 3 of you putting something really incredible together. So with that in mind, I was just curious, do each of you have any questions for one another, based on what you've read or heard today?
Hot seat.
Not to put you on the spot, but
I'd love to know about, I guess, with the seaweed you'd actually had mentioned, because a lot of the chefs are in Ireland, and especially in the west of Ireland and Galway, are getting up early and collecting seaweed. And I've never done anything really with that, but I'd love to know what you would do with seaweed.
Yeah, so I had actually, at the start of the pandemic, one of my friends who lives in Ireland, actually near Galway. Yes. She knew everybody was having a tough time, and so she just went out to the coast and gathered all the seaweed and just threw it in boxes and mailed it to her friends around the world. And so I was one of the seaweed recipients. And I just took the seaweed, and I actually just pickled it in vinegar, just in apple cider vinegar, and then I'll take little bits of it and chop it up and use it like a garnish. And then the vinegar has this really nice sort of, salty seawater kind of flavor to it now. It's really good. And I'll sometimes put it in if I make kimchi or sauerkraut or something. I'll put little bits in there too.
I know chefs do that in oysters in Ireland. I had that in the west of Ireland, but the seaweed, the fermented seaweed, and it was delicious.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, or we could jump into the story, because I would love to. You were referencing the stories that come from food, and so as I was listening to you, but I was thinking about this earlier, that each of you, you talked about what kind of led you there, but I was just curious, when you think about some of the stories growing up and how that impacted you, taking this path, and right now, every book is a different path. So I'd be curious if there anything that you would hearken back to that kind of led you overall towards this, but also to this particular book. And anyone can jump in.
I can go. So I got into fermentation actually because I was pretty food insecure in my early adulthood. I was going to food banks and all of that, and for any of you who've ever been to a food bank, you know the food you get isn't always the best food, not always the most nutritious. Sometimes it is, kind of depends what people donate. So I started gardening outside of my apartment in part as a way to have vegetables in my life. And as any gardener knows, once you grow cabbages or you grow whatever, then you have all of these cabbages all at once. And so I started with sauerkraut and then kind of just went from there. And it's just been this whole rabbit hole that I've dove down as a result.
That's great.
I think for me, my family always grew up eating dinner together, like regardless of, we always cooked at home, we always eat dinner together. And I started to realize as I got older that not everybody's family did that. And what a shame it was to not have that dedicated time to sit down and talk to each other. And the book is about beef, but there is a lot of undertones of bringing kind of fun back to the kitchen and enjoying the cooking, but also doing it together and sitting around a family table and having that sense of community and cooking for others and realizing that food really brings people together, ultimately.
Makes sense. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, and for me, it was really emotional when I had American guests that came over to Ireland, and they were really going on the footsteps of their ancestors and maybe looking out to the ocean and imagining their great parents, leaving Ireland and maybe from the Irish famine or the different reasons why they would have left Ireland and to move to America. And then they're coming back to Ireland, and they're standing on the shores and maybe imagining, maybe with someone with a tear in their eye, and just the emotion that they have felt and how important it was for them to trace those steps to Ireland. And then, for me, realizing that was a connection that meant something to people who had ancestry in Ireland, just as how much food meant for me as an immigrant moving over from another country to the United States, and how food was that thing that connected me, that was very healing for my heart. And, hospitality, eating together, having a meal, having those shared experiences, it's something that really, it was really my saving grace for moving as an immigrant, being able to cook and to hang out with people, and because it can be obviously very lonely when you're isolated, especially during the pandemic. I think we've all through times where it's been very lonely and very isolating, and I think cooking is a way of bringing people together, and those stories that we have, it's something that we all have in common. And especially culture is something that connects us. Heritage is something that brings us together, and it's just wonderful, I think, to learn all different cultures. America is such a melting pot. We just became American citizens just last week. I'm so proud of that, and so proud to be part of this amazing country, and that's what really why I wanted to come to America in the first place, because I just thought what's great about America is that there's that sense of coming together, and where every nation is celebrated with the foods and coming. I came from Northern Ireland. When I moved, it was a difficult time. When we had moved over, we're coming out of a difficult time. And America was that place of freedom, and that place of coming together. And food to me is such a start of the American dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I think about books on food or cookbooks, what have you, I think about the audience. I think about, who is this intended for? And so I'm just curious, as you think about your books, who is the audience? Both intentional and unintentional, and especially as you've kind of, walked through some of it's coming out later, but just curious.
My audience is generally busy families. Okay. It's, again, it's kind of bringing people together. They're easy meals, but they're elevated meals. It's back to kind of pure comfort, American comfort food. but definitely the person that looks at cooking as a chore. They're my challenge. I want them to enjoy it again. But it's generally kind of just busy people that enjoy really good food. It's a very broad audience, but those are my people.
That's great.
Yeah, I think obviously mine has a lot of, narrative, deep dive history stuff, so it's helpful if you are interested in history. You'll probably like it a little better. But that said, I'm hoping that there's some part of that history, because this touches on every part of the globe, I'm hoping some part of that can resonate with everyone. And I think it's ultimately for anybody who's curious, who maybe wants to try new things or try some different ways to explore things that they already know about. So whoever is curious is my ideal audience.
Yes, I love that word, curious. I think that sums up. I think being an Irish immigrant, in America I think that there is a percentage of that people that are Irish Americans that identify with that. So I think that would be a portion of what I do, but I wouldn't say it would be the majority of people who actually are interested in the shamrock and peach. There would be people that love to travel and that love culture, that love foodies, as we say, and they love to experience food from all over the world and are really curious as what is Irish food all about. So that's what I get a lot of people that want to come out just for fun and for entertainment to my cooking classes, or want to read about the stories. And the Irish are known for being good fun. There's a word we say, good crack. Now that's nothing to do with drugs. It's the Irish word for good fun. C-R-A-I-C, and I think that people like to read about the crack, they like to read about the stories, and they like to learn about the food and the drink, of course, of Ireland.
Thank you. I'm always curious when your life's work is experimenting and cooking and trying different things, creating recipes. How much do you cook for you? Do you on that kind of, you mentioned the daily chore of just the family life. I'm just curious. Do you participate in that every day, or is that something you're like, oh, I'm done?
For the most part, I do. I also have 2 very small kids, and we definitely order pizza sometimes. But honestly, for me, like the recipes that my book has are kind of elevated but simple recipes. I really enjoy on Sundays doing something that takes a little bit longer, like a longer braise or sous vide, or something a little bit more technically involved, because a lot of what I do is try to take those recipes and simplify them during the week. But we probably recipe test something every single day, almost every single day. I try to take 1 or 2 days off. I still enjoy eating out, but my kids are 3 and 5. They're not the most fun dining partners at the moment, so.
I've been there.
Yeah, so I cook every day. I actually start out every morning making the different fermented foods I'm working on. It's like kind of this whole morning ritual meditation thing for me. It's kind of evolved into. It's really nice. And I tend to cook throughout the day. I mean, also, I get busy and I sometimes order pizzas too, but yeah. Mostly I do a lot of cooking.
Yes, I cook every day, and I have 2 sons, and one is at college and one just started working. But I think the greatest compliment for a mother is when your son sends you photographs of the food that he's cooking whenever they leave the nest, and they're kind of taking that on to the next generations. To me, that's kind of the greatest achievement that you can have whenever they have that love of food. And yes, food's a way for me to show I love you. If I love you, I'll cook for you, whether it be my family, my friends, and I love to be able to cook for anyone. You're all welcome to come to my house for dinner.
I think you get a lot of takers. Well, speaking of coming to Judith's house, tell us a little bit about the tours. I do know that. So you're actually kind of serious when you say you can come to my house.
Oh, yes. Well, even better, come to Ireland with me. You're all invited to come to Ireland. I do different tours of Ireland. I do 3 different areas. One covering the southern part of Ireland, and one doing the Wild Atlantic Way, which is the coastline, and then one from the north and the west of Ireland, which is actually the part that I am from. But I find that most people tend to want to go to the more southern and the western coast, but it's all beautiful. It's all stunning. And our tours are 7 nights, 8 days, and I'm the owner of the company and the guide. So I meet and greet at Dublin Airport, and we have a lot of fun. We eat great food, and we travel all over. We do cover a lot of ground. We do all the beautiful sights and scenery, as well as us having incredible dinners, and it's always wonderful to be able to see a bunch of people who don't know each other very well at the start of the week, and then you just build great relationships, through the course of the week together. So I am just so blessed to be able to do what I love. And my poor husband, he didn't see me. I was gone for 2 months this summer. I felt really guilty. It was like, oh, I had such a good time, and he really missed me. I thought, I'm sorry, honey, but I didn't miss you. but he says he's going to allow me to go again next year.
I think I got a couple minutes, maybe squeeze in a couple. Jessica, I know you come to this area, pretty regularly, and I was just curious if, doing some taping or whatever, you want to share a little bit about what brings you to Atlanta and some of your other business interests?
I do a lot of TV, so I do a lot of cooking demos for national food brands, and there's a couple of broadcasting companies that are here in Atlanta, so I do kind of quick 24-hour turnarounds where I go to a TV station and they plug me into about 40 different news stations and radio shows in 4 hours, and I do cooking demo after cooking demo after cooking demo after cooking demo. So you might have seen me on your local news, or I've done a couple of things on Cooking Channel and Food Network and things along those lines. So it's a lot of fun. I like the interaction.
That's awesome. Julia, I'll admit, when I first was kind of learning about foraging, some of it came through just seeing some YouTube and some other. So how can you discern, who you should be following and who you shouldn't be? Because I think you could be led astray, if I'm not mistaken, in some cases.
Oh, yeah, you absolutely could. I mean, I think the best thing to do is to not just look at one source. I mean, look at local guidebooks, look at stuff from your extension office, take classes, look at different people in social media. I really like Mallory O'Donnell, one of my dear friends and a really wonderful person. Pascal Bowder is also really good. But there's a ton of people out there, and I think, triple checking everything from different sources is probably the most important thing to do, whoever you're following.
Thank you. Well, I think I have exhausted all the time, and I really appreciate your attention, but let's give a round of applause for Judith Mclaughlin, Julia Skinner, and Jessica Formicola. All right, thank you, everyone. I want to say your name.